Yay. Yay. And we're
Hey,
live.
hey.
Yay. Sorry for the
Woo.
delay, everyone. This is our very first episode. We're still working out some of the tech details, but yay, we made it work.
We did. It's the 21st century of Over the River and Through the Woods. We got to
Yay.
get
Right.
the website right. We got the broadcast right. And then the Wi-Fi. Who knows? But anyway, that said, welcome to We the People of Color podcast. My name's Atiba Ellis.
I'm Nareissa Smith.
And welcome.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. And also, just know that we are very, very happy to have everyone here. We hope that you are watching along and listening. And we hope that if you enjoy it, you will tag other people so that they can come in and come along too. And if you didn't see our 0 episode, which of course you haven't because we just taped it before this one and it's not live yet, but we decided to do this because we feel that there's a deep need for something like this for folks who have knowledge about the law and about the United States Constitution to try to explain to folks, particularly people of color who don't have legal knowledge, some of the things that they might have questions about. And it's not us, please, it's not us being elitist, as we talked about in the 0 episode. You know, we have definitely come from humble beginnings, but we understand that unlike the medical profession, which has done such a great job in demystifying so many things, you know, like there's WebMD, you know, there's all these great websites, you know, that you can go to, you know, to figure things out. And for the law, that doesn't always exist, you know, or, you know, it's talked about in such stilted language that you practically have to have a law degree to understand.
Or you see one of these, you know, 2 a.m. cable access television episodes where some lawyer's trying to drum up business. And they're like, well, if your dog does pee on your neighbor's lawn, here's your opportunities. No, we're not about that, right? We are folks who know that, I mean, we both have expertise in the law. We're both working thought leaders in our fields, and we want to inform you about our thoughts, our perspectives, and ultimately to inform you and empower you to make decisions. I mean, 2020 is an election year. You have decisions to make next month. I mean, hopefully you've already voted. And if you haven't, we can talk about how to get there. But whether you vote Monday or weeks from today, we want to empower you in making the decision. And we want to, you know, talk about what we deeply believe in terms of all of our civic duty to vote and to engage in the political process. And the fact of the matter is that voting is the first step of many. And in that sense, we want to empower folks with information and insight in order to take those steps to be members of our political community.
And, you know, I like the fact that you just said voting is one step of many, because I think that a lot of folks, and especially like in 2016, and Lord knows, even a few folks in 2020, folks get turned off because they think that, well, you know, I voted for Obama and nothing changed, but that's not the way it works. I love that commercial, you know, that old commercial, well, it's old now, but the lady's talking about how she's posted things to her wall, right? And she has
Sarah, let me post the picture here. I'm putting a post up. And then her girlfriend's like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
Exactly. And what I want to bring it back to, especially since we're talking about, and this is people of color, Malcolm X said it, the ballot or the bullet, right? And I think that what we need to be thinking about is we need ballots and bullets, metaphorical bullets. Let me be really clear about that, because I would never say that we should not protest. In fact, the only reason why we are here today to be able to do what we're doing, as we said in the Zero episode, is because people protested. But they protested also because they had no other options, right? The sit-ins, the marches, they could not vote. They couldn't do these things. They could march and they could boycott, and they did other things that they could do, but they didn't have the option to vote. We have that option because they sacrificed and gave it to us. Now that we have that tool in our kit, why would we not use it? And this is not to say that voting is going to make everything perfect. That, I think, is the biggest, hole in that argument, that, well, if you vote for Biden, you think Biden's going to make everything perfect. No, Biden's not going to make everything perfect, because Biden's not even the most powerful person in the government, under the Constitution. When I used to teach constitutional law, I used to say, people want to act like the president is Superman. The president's not Superman. If we're talking about the Justice League, the president is more like Aquaman. Very powerful, but only in a very limited context, right? Remember how back in the day, Aquaman could only do stuff like if it had something to do with water or fish. And then exactly. And even as a kid, I would be like, okay, why did they have to have this, the Justice League have to have something down by the river? They only did this so Aquaman could have something to do. But the president, within the realm of presidential powers, to appoint people, Trump has used the heck out of that power, and the power to command the military. Those are huge powers in and of themselves. And the fact that the president, even though the Constitution doesn't speak directly to this, but the president is in control of those federal agencies, like the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice that has authority to investigate things like police departments, to investigate things like hate crimes, to investigate these things. And so we have data on them, right? We need to vote for people who will create that structure. But even more important is Congress, right? Congress has the bigger powers. Congress has power over how to tax and spend. That might be the biggest power in the Constitution, because whoever has the money has the power, right? That's a huge thing. Congress has the power to declare war. That's a pretty big deal. And so we need to. So
you're saying Congress is Superman in our Justice League analogy?
Yeah, I
would say
that. I would say that Congress is Superman, the president's Aquaman, and I'm going to put the Supreme Court as Wonder Woman, because I'm going to put them as over the president even. Because
they can throw the lasso of judicial review and freeze whatever any of the others are doing.
Exactly.
And so to build on this, though, you got to have the entire Justice League to have governance. And you've got to have the entirety of the government working in a direction that makes sense to we the people, right?
Exactly.
This podcast is called We the People of Color. And part of the constitutional design is that we get to choose the people who make these choices.
Exactly.
Maybe not the courts directly, but we choose Congress, we choose the president, we choose Aquaman and Superman. They get to pick Wonder Woman, they get to work together. And the revolutionary thing about democracy, the reason why 250 years ago people were scared of democracy, they were scared of democracy because they didn't want to trust the people to make those decisions. But part of what has happened in those 250 years is that more and more of we, the people, have gotten involved in those decisions. And because of that, we have a responsibility now. And so our job is to empower you to make those responsibilities, speaking from the perspective of who we are as people of color, of what we've experienced, of the history we've lived through, and our hope for the future, right? So.
Well said. Well said. And with that, I think we should go into talking about the structure of the podcast. This particular podcast at the moment, we're treating it like the McRib. It's here for a limited time, and we don't know how long it's going to be here. We hope to do this through the election is our plan, but if you all really like it, we will be more than happy to keep this going because this has been a lot of work, but this has been also so much fun. And one of the things you will hear too is that Atiba and I have known each other. So I'm not even going to say how long it is because it's definitely some double digits involved. We can get into that later. But hopefully what you will also see exactly coming through.
If you were going to talk about it, I was going to hide.
I know. Exactly. So we want to also share with you our thoughts, but not in that whole very stuffy, way, but in a very fun, what we hope is a fun and relaxed way that will give you information that you need to empower you. So the way that this podcast is going to go.
Bear in mind, dad jokes are allowed.
Mom jokes too.
Mom jokes too. All right.
And what we are going to do in each of these episodes is talk about how to vote and why you need to be voting and, anything else that might be going on in the world. So with that said, our first segment this week is going to be talking about how to vote. And with the how to vote, Professor Ellis, who is one of our leading experts on voting rights and the fiction of voter fraud, I want to throw it over to you to ask you the first question, which is, how concerned should folks be about their ability to vote? When you hear about like what Governor Abbott did down in Texas, those sorts of things, based on the research that you've done and everything that you've written, what are your thoughts on that, and how can folks fight back? Because this is clearly something that's aimed at communities of color. Clearly.
And so real quick, before I launch into this, one thing you may see either of us doing at some time, we are recording around 1 Eastern on Saturday. And the fact of the matter is, these first few days of October have, as I saw on a meme the other day, October so far is the 2020 of 2020. And
we're not even into it yet.
We will talk. We'll have our 2020 round in after we have this first conversation. But of course, the first conversation we want to have is about how to vote. But it's a very 2020 thing about voting. Ordinarily, I would say, make sure you're registered. Make sure you meet the deadlines, and then go cast your vote. But it isn't that easy this year, right? And it's harder because we're all worried about the coronavirus. We're all worried about avoiding situations that would make us sick. So the best advice on how to vote in a general level is to have a plan. Now, Nareissa mentioned Governor Abbott and Texas, and this is part of a pattern, right? So part of the plan has been trying to expand voting by mail, and different states, it's called vote by mail or absentee balloting or whatnot. But the theory is that you should be able to, and I'm going to go get a prop, get your, where is it? I was going to go try to find my absentee ballot. Had I had 30 more seconds in the green room, I would have found it. I mean, well, at least the envelope. I've already submitted my ballot. So
good.
But the point being, like, as a general matter, know your plan. If you're going to vote in person on election day, think through how that's going to work for you and create the time to do it ahead. Most states have some form of early voting. So, pick your day, show up, find your polling place, or vote absentee or by mail, which is what I did, which was I requested my ballot. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I requested my ballot from the City of Milwaukee Election Commission, and they sent it to me. I filled it out, and I walked it down to City Hall where they have a drop box. I just dropped it in, did what I needed to do. Now, here's the problem. In some states, like Texas, people like Governor Abbott have decided, well, we don't need that many drop boxes around. And he's argued that in the name of making sure that the election doesn't have any cheating, preventing voter fraud, we're going to limit each county to one of these drop boxes. Now, stop and think about that for a second. This is Texas, right? Everybody says everything's bigger in Texas. There are some counties in Texas that are bigger than a few states, right? The biggest county in Texas, I think, is about 6,000 square miles. That's bigger than like Delaware, bigger than Rhode Island, like that. And you're going to have one drop box for that county? And you're going to have to drive an hour or more just to drop off your ballot? Or think about Harris County, where Houston is located, or Dallas County, where Dallas is located. But I'm not going to say anything about Dallas anymore because, I've got cousins about football. Anyway, the point being, you're going to have a city that is in the millions and just have one drop box? Wait a second. What are you trying to do here, Gov? I would argue that he said he wants to do this about voter fraud, to prevent voter fraud in terms of ballots and drop off. And this feeds into the deep conspiracy that people like President Trump and other Republicans have been saying for over a decade, ever since John Ashcroft lost to a dead man in 2000. That was the other big story in the 2000 election, not just Bush v. Gore and Texas, but Missouri and Ashcroft losing. Ever since, from then till now, voter fraud has been a thing. But study after study after study, including the studies run by Ashcroft's own Justice Department in 2006, studies in 2014 and 15 by reputable scholars like Justin Levitt that have found 31 questionable ballots in a billion, not just million, but billion with a B ballots cast, virtually no in-person voter impersonation fraud. And now they're talking about absentee ballot fraud. Now, there is some absentee ballot fraud, but the fact of the matter is absentee ballot fraud is more often about political operatives trying to take up absentee ballots and cast them illegally. We saw that recently in Nareissa's state, North Carolina, in the 9th Congressional District, where the Republican operative walked around and tried to take ballots from little old ladies, marked the votes for them, and put these forged ballots in the ballot box. Now, he's going to jail for that. They had to recall the entire election, and it went on the second time around fairly. So, but the point being, when people are talking to you about voter fraud, more often than not, they are talking about making it harder to vote, because voter fraud serves as an excuse to do things like have one drop box for the entire city of Houston and county of Harris in Texas for millions of people, right? And how practical is that going to be? That's the problem when we're talking about voter fraud. So the trick is, not only do you have to make your voting plan, but you have to plan around these manufactured difficulties that appear to have no other purpose than to make it harder for people generally, and African Americans and Latino voters in Texas in particular, in order to vote. Now, the trick is, this is all state to state. So you have to figure out what works for you in your state. But the point here is that it's hard enough to vote generally. It's even harder to vote during the Rona. But be aware that there are people who are trying to make it even harder.
Yeah. And I want you to talk a little bit. By the way, just so you know, that's longer than we would normally talk, but we have a nationally recognized expert on this, so I wanted to let him.
You got me started.
But I wanted to ask you, and I know, forgive me because I didn't mention this earlier, but this is a question that I think bears asking, that has to be asked. What is the connection between this meme of voter fraud? And for folks that don't know, a meme is not just a funny thing. It's like, this mantra, this thing that gets repeated. So basically, let's call it these lies around voter fraud. One of the things, and I want to ask you about that, I noticed an uptick in those arguments after President Obama was elected. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of that was people of color showed up and showed out at the polls, and he won resoundingly. So I think about that. And then in historical context, thinking about how back in the day, after slavery, during the very brief Reconstruction period, when Black men had the right to vote, because no women of any color had the right to vote until 1920, but there were Black folks in Congress. And one of the first things that the Southern states did when Reconstruction was over was like, okay, nope, y'all can't vote. Nope, get them out of there. And you don't see Black folks returning to Congress from the South. I mean, you have DePriest in Chicago, and of course, the inimitable Adam Clayton Powell, who is just awesome, out of Harlem, New York. But you don't have a lot of Black folks in Congress, for generations after that. And then, you don't have a lot of Asians or Latinos either. So the question that I want to pose to you is, what's the connection between race and this idea of voter fraud? I know it's not 100% new, but what's the connection? The idea of voter fraud is new. What's the connection between race and voter fraud? And is it something that we've seen an uptick in as voters of color have become more powerful in American politics?
So, I mean, my current research is all about this question, right? When we talk about voter fraud, we're talking about, okay, the idea that there are bad people who are going to interfere with the vote. Now, the connection is very simple. Those bad people tend to be pointed out as people of color. I mean, all throughout American history, whether it's the exclusion of people of African Americans, regardless of whether they were enslaved or not, from citizenship, that's what Dred Scott versus Sanford did. Suddenly, they're excluded from citizenship. That means they can't vote, right? Even if you're a free Black in 1858, you couldn't vote under the principle in Dred Scott. Even after Reconstruction, where we guaranteed Black men the vote, poll taxes and literacy tests, and particularly felon disenfranchisement laws were all about, well, let's criminalize or make it harder to make Black folks vote, and then we can exclude them that way, right? Not because we're talking about race, but because we're saying, oh, you have to be worthy of voting by measuring up in this way. And if you don't measure up, then you are a vicious voter. You are a dangerous voter. The modern day voter fraud talk of, oh, somebody's going to show up and distort the election. I mean, I remember in the, what was it? The special election to replace Jeff Sessions, there were rumors about, oh, they're putting a bunch of people on, Black people in Mississippi, and they're carting them to Alabama to vote, right? Again, this voter fraud talk is about you victimizing African Americans by trading on the stereotypes about them and saying that they're evil, they're dangerous, they're not worthy, and thus they shouldn't vote, right? And these stereotypes get played out in laws of this sort, even if they're not explicitly talking about people of color.
Very good, sir. Very awesome, awesome stuff. Bravo.
This is what I work on. This is what I work on.
Yeah,
but
all the time.
But let's talk not just about how to vote, but why to vote, right? That's our second question in our structure. And this question of why to vote in 2020 and the crazy politics that we're seeing right now, especially, I mean, we both have our phones and our computers open right now because breaking news might break any minute.
And if this has not been the breakingest of breaking news weeks, it's so funny because earlier this morning when I woke up, and I'm sorry not to cut you off, but I'm cutting you off.
No, go ahead.
The folks who have been getting me through
I was just trying to set you up to take it away. So
are folks like, Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah, those type of folks, have been getting me through it because the news is so hard to deal with without a dose of humor. And so watching, Trevor Noah on every Saturday, he does this, what happened this week, right? And so it was going back, it's like, oh, the debate. Oh, yeah, that did happen this week. That was
Tuesday.
Exactly. It's like, oh, yeah, that feels like that was last month now because so much has happened in the last 24 to 48 hours. And there's a lot going on. But what we want to talk about is why to vote. And one of the reasons why we need to vote, I mean, there's so many, right? We were just talking about the president's, one of the president's biggest powers is appointments. The president appoints judges. We see now with the death of the late, great, and I mean that in every sense of the word, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, now we see that the person that Trump wants to use to replace her is someone who does not believe any of the things that she believes, right? And for those of you who don't know, traditionally, and I'm saying traditionally, there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. And I say traditionally because there's nothing in a statute or in a constitution that says it has to be 9, right?
It's just been that way since 1870 something.
But as we are seeing since 2016, it's a lot of things that have been that way that certain folks have been changing all willy-nilly and whatnot. It used to be the case that no one would think about trying to appoint a Supreme Court justice after people had already started casting ballots in a presidential election. But, you throw one norm out the window, what's, another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just to pile on. But basically, here's what we have. So there were 9 people on the Supreme Court. With the passing of Justice Ginsburg, that means there are 8, right? You can't see me. 8.
Mm-hmm.
That might not seem like such a big deal. Okay, well, you know, there's 8 people, 8 justices, but it's a huge problem. And let me back up to why. Just a bit of a historical lesson. And we can go into this in later ones, but people are probably familiar with the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, argued very eloquently by Justice Thurgood Marshall, and who later became a Supreme Court justice, was a lawyer at the time. And Justice Marshall, you know, was able to persuade the court. The Chief Justice of the court at that time was a man named Earl Warren, who, one of my favorite stories about Justice Warren, who was appointed by Eisenhower. Warren actually had, you know, some conservative leanings. He was the head of Eisenhower's, you know, California campaign, and this was sort of his reward. And then he gets on the court and just does all of these wonderful changes, not just with Brown and integration, but also the Miranda case comes out during that time. Gideon versus Wainwright, which is the case that says that you do have to have the government pay for your attorney if you can't afford one. Just all of these huge watershed type things, right? Then, and this is why elections matter. So here's why we should vote, right? 1968 was another key election just like this one, but with even more. 1968 might be the one year in recent American history that might have a claim on being as tumultuous as 2020, because very early on in the year, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. That spawned, you know, a wave of outcries and rebellions and just lots of stuff going on. Then Bobby Kennedy, who, had he won, would have been, you know, progressive on a lot of things, would have followed the best of what LBJ, Lyndon Johnson was doing, and he's assassinated in August. There's this horrible Democratic convention, you know, where there's so much infighting and folks just, you know, can't, you know, agree on things about who's the best candidate. And what ends up is Richard Nixon ends up winning the election. Why does that matter? Because Richard Nixon ends up appointing several justices, and that changes the court. So the Warren Court, which had tried to be progressive, which, so you know, is not the way the Supreme Court usually goes. The Supreme Court, you know, other than the Warren Court, which is kind of this bright spot, especially on issues that matter to people of color, had not always been that progressive, you know, but the Warren Court sort of showed people that, oh, the Supreme Court, you know, can be about doing some things. So it transitions, right? And then it gets a little bit more conservative, and then it gets a little bit more conservative, and it gets to where we are today. So where we are today is, out of the 8 folks who are on the court now, we have Justice Souter, Justice Sotomayor, and Justice Kagan, who are the only folks who we can trust to reliably vote in the interest of things that would matter for people of color. They voted for the Affordable Care Act, which is something else I want to talk about in a second. But when we talk about things like that, these are people who are going to make decisions that affect so many lives. Because here's what the Supreme Court does. When the Supreme Court makes a rule, that means that it becomes either the floor or the ceiling of what states have to do. So for instance, I'm going to take something that most folks are familiar with, Miranda, right? You have the right to remain silent. That's a constitutionally required rule. So that means whether it's, you know, city, county, state trooper, FBI, if you get arrested, you have to be given Miranda warnings if you're put in custody, right? So that is a minimum rule, bright line that has to happen. If you get folks on the court who have a certain judicial philosophy, it's going to affect so many things. It's going to affect, for instance, medical marijuana and the legalization of it, and recreational marijuana. Colorado, California, all of these states have legalized marijuana, but folks don't realize that under federal law it's still illegal. And I guarantee you that if those folks have their way and the Supreme Court hears it again, they're going to say, as they did a few years ago, that states can't make their own rules. It's a doctrine called preemption, but that's a lot of inside baseball that's beyond this podcast. Another one that we have to talk about that's important, healthcare. The woman that Trump has appointed to this position has gone on the record as saying that she does not agree that the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, is constitutional. If she gets there, it will be a 6-3 vote to overturn Obamacare. And even if Roberts could be persuaded again, like he was the last time the court heard it, it would be 5-4. Because Alito, Thomas for sure, the new person, Gorsuch, and the one who I will not name because he does not deserve to be on the court because he does not treat women well, those 5 are definitely going to vote to overturn Obamacare. Now, there is a way around that, but it also goes back to why you have to vote. Because remember how we were saying that Congress has all these powers like Superman, right? Congress has all of these powers, and the biggest power that they could use would be to say, okay, you know what? Supreme Court, you want to keep playing with us using, commerce powers, whatever. We're just going to use a spending power. Congress's biggest power is the spending power. And the coolest thing about the spending power is that it is able to be used for nearly anything, really, right? So Congress could, in theory, say, we are going to provide a universal healthcare option or Medicaid for all. And, that's what we're going to do. And, you can't stop us. It's going to be a federal option. If they decided to do that, that would be the route of least resistance. Then you might be asking, well, because the Supreme Court hasn't overturned a spending case in, I don't know, can you think of the last time they overturned something on spending power? I can't think of one off the top of my head. Yeah, that power is so big. Taxing cases get overturned all the time, Commerce Clause cases, but that spending power, that's Congress's big, big power.
So and I wanted to throw it back to you for a question, but to kind of preface this, right? And
we have Congress some watching on the live stream. Hi, folks.
Hey, everybody. So so you said all this, right? Congress has the power to, and I mean, by the way, the U.S. government as akin to the Justice League, we mentioned that on the Zero podcast. So we have a prequel here. It's the secret prequel, which, well, it's not secret anymore because we just told you about it, but we talked about why we're doing this and why we're having this conversation. But yes, so the presidency, in a sense, is Aquaman, powerful, but within a limited stream. Yeah. Congress is Superman. Now, by the way, I'm just saying, couldn't we have done Marvel? I mean, Black Panther. I'm just saying.
I'm saying.
Justice
League. I don't
want
to talk about Orange Thanos right now, though.
But I don't know. I mean, we all have the power to destroy the rings with our vote. You know,
yeah, you go away with it. You know,
okay.
I'm not
Anyway, don't nerd with me here.
And by the way, you know that you were giving me, trauma when you said prequel, because there's certain group of prequels that I just can't stand. And the fact that this is called episode 1 makes me think about, a certain prequel, I don't even want to acknowledge happened. It makes me think about a character called Jar Jar Binks, which makes me
don't you went there. You went there after you just stop. I'm going to stop you from hurting yourself right now.
Okay. All right.
Let's talk about Congress a minute. Let's talk about the power.
We'll go back let's talk about less stressful things like racism in the courts.
Wait, what? You broke off there.
I said, you said I need to calm down. So yes, let's talk about something less stressful like racism in the judiciary.
Racism in the judiciary. But I mean, I want you to connect the dots, right?
All right, I'm
going to particularly back to COVID-19 and the disparate impact. I mean, all these choices about Obamacare and the power that the courts may have to overturn it. I mean, what does this really mean in this COVID-19 era, particularly for people of color? That's the question I want us to get to.
It means everything, good sir, unfortunately. And as many of you listening know, communities of color have been hit so hard by this pandemic. African Americans have died at twice the rate of others. Same for Latinx people. I just saw an article yesterday that said not only that, but Latinx folks who are LGBT, are at super high risk. So we get a multitude of factors that make it such that people of color have just been slammed by this. This is the perfect example of, I know when I was growing up, the old folks used to say, if America gets a cold, then Black folks get pneumonia. And I think that this is the perfect example of that. And we are more likely to have the pre-existing conditions that predispose folks to not do well in COVID. Black and Latinx kids for sure are more likely to, have asthma, things like that, respiratory issues. We know that Black folks are more likely to have high blood pressure. And there's all kinds of research on that. Latinx folks and Black folks are more likely to have diabetes or the sugar, as I thought it was called for many years of my life, until I think I was like a senior in high school. It's like, oh, diabetes and sugar are the same thing. I did not know that. So this is the thing that we as communities of color have to do. We have to make sure that, again, this segment is why we need to vote. We need to vote like our lives depend on it, because they literally do. Without healthcare, people of color are less likely to have healthcare, which is a huge deal. Most of the folks who are going to suffer if Obamacare is found unconstitutional are going to be folks of color. And just like most of the folks in this pandemic are dying for the reason they lack access to healthcare. I mean, and leave to the side, the Tuskegee experiment and all the other, smallpox blankets that were given to the Native folks and all the other horrible things that have been done to people of color, that have medical overtones. Even when you get past that, once you can get us to trust the doctors, we have to have the means to be able to afford to go and to get good health care in our communities, by folks, who understand our communities and our health. And the folks in public health, to their credit, there's so much work that they're doing on this issue of trying to do health equity, right? But, so much of the work that they're doing is going to be in vain if there are folks in power who just don't care about, what happens to folks of color. So to bottom line it, we got to vote, because if these folks get their way, because despite the fact that apparently, and I'm going to try not to be crass about this, despite the fact that so many GOP senators are, the last alert I got them, they're passing around the corona like a nasty potato salad, over on the GOP side of the Senate. So that's what's going on over there. That the GOP potato salad got raisins in it. But anyway, so they are just, passing around the corona, and, which is not that we hope that anyone will be sick, of course, and we hope that everyone recovers very
Karen, quickly. Do not bring your potato salad.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that can.
We all love. We lost Chadwick too soon.
Too soon. Yes.
Wakanda forever, y'all.
Yes.
But let's talk about that for a minute, though, right? And, within the last 48 hours, I was up working at 1 a.m. and my phone blows up. I'm like, what's this? Trump has the virus. Suddenly, lots of members of the GOP. And let's be clear, Judge Barrett's coming out party for this nomination for the Supreme Court seat apparently was a super spreader event.
Yeah.
Because now all kinds of senators have the Rona, but nobody was complaining before this event, right?
But they were out there partying like it was 1999 with no mask on or anything else.
And this is the thing, right? It's as if they just kept pretending that this wasn't a thing, and not listening to the Centers for Disease Control when they're saying, don't have big parties, wear masks, social distancing, do all these things that kept healthy. Isn't it ironic, though, that in the name of pushing away all these kinds of things by appointing a judge to the Supreme Court, who is going to be their big win, that they don't believe in the Rona, and then the Rona shows them, no, I don't care.
Well, remember how I love talking about the ancestors and old folks. Remember how the old folks used to say, you don't have to believe in Jesus, baby, he believe in you. Well, you ain't got to believe in Rona, because Rona believe in you. That's the bottom line.
The Rona doesn't care you don't believe in it.
No, viruses are tricky like that. They just don't care if you believe in them. But what I find interesting, and I know that neither of us are epidemiologists, but I find it interesting that a virus that was supposed to be a hoax and was supposed to go away by Easter and was supposed to disappear like a miracle, just hasn't seemed to do so. So I do think, though, that what Professor Ellis was trying to lead me to was the fact that the Senate just announced, right before we started taping this episode, just announced that they're going to be shutting down their work for 2 weeks until October. Well, actually more than that, until October 19th. But they still want to push this nomination through. So this is where your vote comes in, because, and also, just so you know, there's going to be a lot of folks with blue check marks on Twitter. And by the way, don't get your information from Twitter, especially unless it's somebody that has a law degree. But even then, if they don't know about the Constitution, don't be listening to everybody out there, because they don't always know what they're talking about just because they got a blue check mark. Lord, please, if you get nothing else from this podcast, get that. But if you hear folks saying, well, the Democrats didn't do anything to stop him from nominating her, blah, 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 there's reasons for that. Back
Constitution don't work like that.
The Constitution doesn't work like that, number one, but also the rules of the Senate don't work like that. And there's a recent rule change because the GOP was playing shenanigans a while ago when the Democrats were trying to do things in the Senate And the GOP was abusing this process called a filibuster. A filibuster you might have heard of if you ever watched Parks and Rec, when Leslie got up there and she was in the roller skates and everything, and she had to filibuster. Or if you watch Kimmy Schmidt, when Lillian was trying to do her filibuster.
My favorite example is when Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and he's like, I'm here today to, Zuzu's pedals. Well, we're going to filibuster. I'm going to keep talking and talking and talking.
Zuzu's pedals is from
It's a Wonderful Life, but that's how I get into my Jimmy Stewart impression. I just say Zuzu's pedals, and then I sound like Jimmy Stewart until I keep talking, and I keep talking, and I keep talking. And that's a filibuster, when a senator can take control of the Senate and keep talking and talking and talking.
Yes. And so a recent rules change in the Senate made it so that the filibuster is not an option. And the Dems did this, and they did it to stop the GOP from abusing it. But the irony is that the only thing, the Dems have some procedural maneuvers that they can play out to try to delay it. But even if they do, I would not put it past this particular GOP, especially if they get voted out of power on November 3rd, which Nate Silver says is a pretty good chance that's going to happen. Even if that happens, what is probably going to occur is they might do a lame duck verification if they can't get. Yeah, I just said thank you. I've only been doing this.
You're talking about Twitter and the blue dot verified. Anyway.
And verification. I might have got the word wrong, but I still know what I'm talking about. I knew what I was trying to say, even if the word came out wrong. Yeah, that's right. You better hide.
Lord.
You can only cut the fool like this with someone that you have been friends with for years.
Yeah,
but digress. So here's the point.
Lame duck confirmation in order to scorch the earth after a Democratic blowout November 3rd, right? Exactly. So what's the answer? What's the answer, Nareissa?
The answer is still voting, because here's why. Remember how I told y'all, 20 minutes ago when we started this rant before all the digressions, but remember when I said it's tradition that there are 9 people on the court? Well, back in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, the Supreme Court kept blocking all of his economic proposals to get America out of the Great Depression. And so Roosevelt said, I got y'all. There's nothing in the Constitution that says it has to be 9 of you. Y'all want to act a fool? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put, 3-6 more people on the court who will do what I say. And, y'all can still be there. I can't remove you, but y'all can be there. So here's the thing. It's super important for us to vote and vote for the Senate in particular, because they are going to be in charge of confirming any more judicial nominees. That's number one. So if Biden is elected and there's a Democratic Senate, then there will be justices who are open to preserving the Affordable Care Act and other things like that. So Biden would have the power to appoint 3 liberal justices. So then instead of it being that 6-3 split in favor, it could be a 6-6 split, or he could appoint 4 people and then it would be a 7-6 split. That would be interesting. No one in living memory has heard of a court packing plan that actually was going to work. But Biden has gone on the record as saying all of the options are on the table.
And like we said, 9 was established late 19th century, right? So no one's ever thought about that.
Yeah, back in the day, the first court was 5. I can't remember. It's been so long since I looked at that.
It was 5 early on. Then it was 7 for a minute. But then, by the
time I'm not recalling came on, it was 7, right? Mm-hmm. But we get into inside baseball. We're gonna stop the inside baseball.
But here's the point, though. If you're okay with the trajectory of where things are heading today and the way things have been, and especially the fact that the courts have kind of endorsed all kinds of policies on this conservative liberal split, okay, that's fine. But as you can tell, we're saying if you want someone who is going to be avowedly and aggressively protecting the interest of people of color, for example, Obamacare, then vote not just for the president, but for the House and the Senate in a way consistent with that.
And I'm going to add another thing. This one is more far-fetched, but just to show you all how far things could go. And this will come back to the court in a couple of different ways, though. Let's say, worst case scenario, right? Let's say Trump wins the election, but if there's a Democratic Senate, he could probably and will probably be impeached again. If not for something he's already done, we know if Trump wins re-election, he's going to be so drunk with power, he probably won't wait until February until he does something stupid again. So the fact of the matter is, though, the only reason why he's still president is because Mitt Romney was the only Republican senator who said, sir, what you're doing is quite frankly ridiculous, and you should not be doing it. And those came down on party lines. And it's a sad reflection in some ways on our democracy that it is partisan, because the type of things that Trump is doing should not be considered partisan at all, whether you are a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, Blue Party, Purple Party, whatever. You should be very concerned that someone who is a president of the United States is cooperating with foreign powers to undermine an election, on any level. You should be concerned about that. So it raises the possibility of, if Trump, the other reason why the Senate and the House are important is if Trump should win again, that will keep him in check, because we all know that he must stay in the White House to protect the immunity that he has from the many criminal investigations that are going on around him. So that's one thing.
And he must stay in the White House in order to not make anybody else sick right now. But that's a whole other conversation.
And not to mention that he also got to stay in the White House because we now also learned this week that he broke. So he needs the house to live in, because he's probably going to have to sell Trump Tower, next week to make sure, wouldn't
that be a thing? The repo man rolling up on Donald Trump.
Man, they're coming. You know they coming. It's the whole thing is going to be repo.
But can I throw one more thing?
Throw it
on this list of reasons why this matters. Think about all the bills that the House of Representatives has passed that have died because the Senate hasn't picked them up. Right.
Like the coronavirus relief bill, which is one of the big ones. Right. Yeah.
And like the Voting Rights Act restoration bill, which is another big one. And, think about all these decisions being made not to help people, because this is our position. And in some ways, it isn't even about politics. It's about power. It's about the naked power that Mitch McConnell's exercising, and he may well win his seat, but with a Senate majority that flips, then his power gone.
Yeah. And, since you mentioned it, the old age mutant Ninja Turtle, I would just go ahead and say that when you talk about folks like Mitch McConnell, this is why everybody has to vote, because the senators from across America make decisions that affect all Americans. That impeachment is just one example. And, you hear people like Susan Collins in Maine saying, well, I didn't vote to remove him because I thought he would have learned a lesson. And we know that he learned nothing except maybe how to hide it better. So every person, no matter where you are, if you don't vote, what you're basically saying is either A, you're perfectly okay with these kind of folks making decisions, and you're also perfectly okay with them behaving in the way that they do, which is not the way prior to this that our democracy has worked. And what we want to, I don't want to say leave, even though we are going to have to start the process of winding this down in a little bit.
Get my fade.
I know that's what I was saying. Yeah, and we know that's going to be a process too, but not because of, we were talking yesterday about, when you go to a barbershop or a beauty salon, it's always a process and, a lot of things that have to happen. But the idea,
and there's even more because of the coronavirus. The dude's got to sweep the whole store out before I can come in, and he's always running 20 minutes behind to begin with. So, but I still have to show up for my appointment.
Exactly.
But
yes.
We're going to bring it home then. Let's bring it home, Nareissa.
All right. Well, what I want to do to bring it home is to remember, why should you vote? Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. Your vote is going to impact who sits on the Supreme Court, right? It's going to impact it, and those decisions will impact people for generations. It's going to impact whether or not people get health care. It's going to impact the legality of marijuana. They're going to be hearing cases on affirmative action coming up. They're going to be hearing cases on women's reproductive rights, all of these things that affect communities of color disproportionately. And every term they have a major criminal case. So vote like your life depends on it, because if you are a person of color, it literally does, especially when it pertains to keeping Obamacare around, because it's something that our communities need very much. Closing words, Reverend Dr. Ellis. You want to give the benediction, sir?
Well, so
I just want to, if I may, before we do, one of the things we were going to talk about.
This is like Black church, you think you're getting benediction, then like.
Yeah, take your time. But I was just going to say, one thing that folks may have had questions about is the president's illness and what the Constitution says about that. We didn't get a chance to get to that today. That doesn't mean that we won't cover it. And if you do have more questions about anything that's going on, feel free to contact us. We will put our contact information, if you're watching the replay on YouTube or Facebook, make sure to include that. I just want to say that before we wrap it up, sir.
So I was about to say, and also, I would love to say what we're going to talk about next week, but things keep moving so quickly.
Yeah.
Given where we were Tuesday and where we are today are completely two different universes.
Completely different. And the way 2020 is going, next week we could be talking about what the Constitution says about the aliens that just landed. Who knows?
Don't kid.
Yeah.
Don't kid. I mean,
we could be talking about
we're going to be able to live long and prosper and stuff before it's all over. Anyway, at the end of the day, everything we're saying here is ultimately about, we all own this democracy with everybody else. We have a voice. We need to use it. We need to be informed. We need to go to the polls. We need to do right by ourselves. And like Nareissa talked about, by our children and our grandchildren. So we hope to continue at least through this election. And by the way, this is worth 10 minutes in and of itself at some point. The election is not going to be over on election night. Y'all need to get comfortable with that, right? Between the coronavirus, between the rules changing right and left, between relying on absentee ballots, and in some states, they can't even open those ballots until election day. It's probably going to take at least a week if it's close. If it's a blowout, maybe different. But if it's close, we're going to have to get comfortable with each other. But
yeah, just don't expect going to bed on November 3rd knowing who the new president is going to be.
It might be November 13th. It might be Thanksgiving. And it might be later, because if it's close, then they're going to litigate. But with
which is
that,
another reason to vote, so it won't be close, and we can get spared that, because I know we got to end this. But if he puts this woman on the court, remember, those of you who are young might not remember, but in 2000, the Supreme Court stopped the recount in Florida, which is how George W. Bush got to be president. If the Supreme Court gets to make any decisions on that, then he has, even now, without her, he will probably have a 5-3 vote to stop any litigation around it. And yeah, if he gets her, he has the extra vote that he needs. And the shenanigans that they pulled in Bush v. Gore could happen again. We don't want to see that happen. We should not be close.
And maybe at some point we should talk about that, so that you can, if you weren't there, because I was a law clerk at the time, I remember it clearly, but this could happen again next month. But we're going to prep you for that. And our mission here is to get us, at a minimum, through this election with informed perspective and commentary that will empower all of us as we, the people of color. There's a drop line. Here's my mic. I'm dropping it.
Thank you all for joining us. We've seen several people drop in. Next time, feel free to leave a note, leave a comment. We appreciate you joining us today. This will be posted on Monday. Take care. And as always, we the people of color.